Charles, we all are aware, and we have been watching the war in Israel and in Palestine and the Gaza Strip. And what we're looking at, Charles, is something we all hoped that we would not see. We were praying that there would be peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and a two-state solution could possibly be envisioned and brought to a reality with the right type of proper minds in place on both sides. But now what Hamas has done by going into Israel and doing what they did is completely against the theology and the foundation of Islam itself. You're harming innocent men, women, and children. You're kidnapping children yelling Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. You're kidnapping elderly women yelling Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. When Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, Ibn Abdullah said that if you kill one innocent human being, it is as though you've killed the whole of humanity. He said the ink of the scholar is more important and precious than the blood of the martyr. What the Prophet was instructing us to do is fight conflict with education, fight conflict with knowledge, but don't ever harm innocent men, women, and children of any background, ethnic group, or faith or religion. They went completely against the tenets of Islam, fighting and yelling slogans that are blasphemous in Islam when you're killing innocent people. There's serious conflict there, but I'm concerned that the Israelis' quest for revenge, some of the hardliners who can now use this action as justification of bringing forth something that will never produce peace. I'm afraid, Charles, that we may see the beginning of World War III.
Yeah, I think you talked about the killing and kidnapping. You left off all the raping, and of course you are, avoiding the reality that there are a great number of Islamist regimes and Islamist scholars that absolutely disagree with your take on violence directed at infidels and non-believers. And we have to have an honest conversation about Islamic intolerance to the existence of other people. And of course, we've seen waves of people cheering the deaths at the music festival. We've seen it here in America. It consumed London, right? And these are also people of the Muslim faith who think it's absolutely justified. But I will most certainly recognize that the Muslim faith is one of the two largest religions in the world, and there are scores of people who do not accept or embrace the radicalism. The problem is you have the Saudi Arabian government, the Iranian government, right? The Palestinian people have repeatedly elected Hamas leadership, right? You have the Lebanese government. You have other radical Islamic regimes that see and articulate that non-believers, infidels, and other members of different portions of the Muslim faith, or people in Muslim communities that don't subscribe to traditional gender roles, or women, are all somehow less than. And we need to have an honest conversation about it. And we need to stop trying to talk about everything else other than the terror that occurred, other than the fact that women and children were murdered and raped, right? Women were held down and they watched their male companions get executed. They were held down and anally sodomized, right? And then paraded through the streets. There are videos on Twitter of women bleeding profusely from sexual assault while they're being paraded through. Of course you didn't, because you're not interested in looking into the realities of what's going on.
No, I do agree that women were attacked and women were beaten, which is wrong, but I didn't see one video of one Hamas soldier raping a woman.
I'm not surprised that you seek to parse this, right? And the truth is...
And if they did do it, it's evil and it's wrong.
Okay, well...
But please share that video with me.
Okay, but the truth is, right, that every time anyone criticizes an Islamic regime or radical Islamism, you're labeled as an Islamophobe or somehow antagonistic to Muslim people. And the truth also is that the people that suffer the most are the Muslim Palestinians who simply want to live a normal life, right? Every time there's normalization, There is more terror attacks in Israel that have traditionally focused on school buses and cafes, and but not just Hamas, but their predecessors, the PLO and the Palestinian Authority, have always used terror as a way to destroy normalization. And that leads to tremendous suffering by the Muslim faithful. And you have to ask yourself why, right? Why does Lebanon, why does Jordan, why do the countries surrounding Israel not offer solutions? In fact, why are they antagonistic to solutions? You talk about, well, Palestinian land, but that's actually not accurate, right? The colonization of the Ottoman Empire, they were in control until the United Kingdom was in control, right? And in the 40s, they ceded control to the United Nations, right? And the United Nations immediately proposed a two-state solution, right? The Palestine and Israel, and then a joint portion of Holy Lands to be shared. Well, who rejected it?
It wasn't right to do that.
Hold on.
The United Nations did not have a right to do that.
Hold on.
You cannot step in the name of the United Nations and pick somebody else's land and say, we're going to carve it up and divide it, and we're going to make two states and give one to one and one to another. See, that's European neo-colonial conquest. They did it all throughout Africa, taking land, dividing it up, and saying Africans could be here and the white new settlers could be here. That's the same thing that took place right there in Palestine. Why is it if the United Nations believed that after the Jewish Holocaust, it was necessary to establish a Jewish homeland, why did it place that homeland in Europe? That Holocaust took place in Europe. It did not take place in Palestine or in the Middle East. Why didn't they make the people of Europe give them a homeland? After all, that's where the Holocaust took place.
Well, if you want to dial it back to what forced the Jewish people from their ancestral lands, well, of course, that would be historic attacks by a Muslim regime and Muslim empires that saw them somehow as being less than or subhuman and not allowed to have their property. This is the historical home of the Jewish people, but it's also the historical home of the Palestinian people and people of the Muslim
And they've
faith.
always lived together.
Well, but every time they start living together, since 1947, right?
Since 1947.
Actually,
but how were they living before 1947?
Whenever you're done lying, we can try to
How
have
were they
a real
living before
conversation.
1947? They got along.
Okay,
they were doing well.
Actually, they didn't, right?
Charles, there's videos on Twitter right now of Jewish people in Israel beating Christians for just being Christians. There's videos on Twitter right now of Jews spitting on nuns, Hasidic Jews spitting in the faces of nuns for being Christians. They're extremist crazies in all religions. But what we need is people of reasonable common sense and intelligence to represent the faith in the manner that should be represented and challenge those who are wrong. But it was not right, Charles, to set up and occupy somebody else's land to give it to somebody else. That same thing happened right here in America when those Europeans came in and wanted to colonize what they believe now is America and took it from the Indians. Colonization of any kind is wrong. And whether it's in the name of race or religion, it's wrong. A two-state solution is the only solution there, but there's extremists on both sides, the Muslims as well as the Israelis, the Jews, who don't want peace and do everything possible to stop peace. Why do you think Hamas did this? Because Hamas heard in the last 2 weeks that Saudi Arabia, for the first time in its history, was considering strongly normalizing diplomatic ties with Israel. And when that was announced, then you saw Hamas pull this action to break that from ever happening. If Saudi Arabia, the strongest Muslim country in the world, that has the most holiest site to all Muslims on earth, normalized ties with Israel, it would have been a game changer. That's why Hamas did what they did.
Now that I've let you interrupt me and go on for God knows how long, I'm going to try to finish my point, right? This is what no one wants to hear, an honest conversation about the fact that the Jewish state, because it doesn't fit the narrative, which is odd, the narrative of liberalism and those on the far right either, that they seem to agree on anti-Semitism. No one wants to talk about facts, right? And the fact is that over and over and over again, the Israelis and the international community have pushed the result of a two-state solution, right? And you talk about, oh, this land, this land, this land. Well, you know, obviously the Jewish faithful were forced out by violent, murderous anti-Semitism, right? And some of them still remained, very few, and of course a great number returned. And we saw millions, what would be billions today, invested into what is now modern day Israel to try to improve and irrigate and create a viable state. And every time, every single time, the hardliners of Israel were pushed back, and moderates, because what you don't hear in Palestine, what you don't hear in Jordan, what you don't hear in Lebanon, you do hear in Israel. You have a great number of leftists in Israel. You have a major, the largest newspaper that is now this week blaming the Israeli government. You have those that want to normalize relationships despite all the violence because they're horrified by the blockade and they're horrified by the living conditions, right? Normal people should be horrified by the blockade of Palestine, but the blockade was people want to pretend there wasn't a predicate, and the predicate has always been terrorism directed at civilians by Islamic terrorists, right? We don't have a solution because in that region, the Middle East, a huge number of people believe in eradication of the Jewish people and genocide and eradication of the Jewish state, right? And at the end of the day, we need to be intolerant of the intolerant.
Let me tell you something I heard.
Let's hear. We're going to talk about everything else but what happened. Louis
Farrakhan say to Yasser Arafat, I heard this. They were chanting down with Israel in his presence. And Minister Farrakhan said, you all chant down with Israel too much. He said, why don't you chant more up with the Quran? Because if you chant up with the Quran, your condition would be changed and Israel could not change it. But you're yelling down with Israel, and Israel exists because Allah, God, allows Israel to exist. And so instead of us trying to stop the existence of a nation, why don't you uplift this nation with the Quran? I heard him say that. The problem right now, Charles, is there's some serious extremism on all sides here, man, that don't ever want to see a peaceful two-state solution. And they're willing to do whatever that they can do to stop it. So now, let me say this. There's talk and suggestions that Iran is behind this financial support of Hamas that carried this attack out, because they believe Hamas could not have done this attack on this level without financial support of another nation. They're saying they believe that it's Iran because Iran supposedly has a long-standing relationship with Hamas and financing them and building them economics. And Iran claims that that money was for humanitarian reasons in Palestine. But be that as it may, Israel has to be careful, Charles, because if they pull Hezbollah into this, if they pull Islamic Jihad into this, in their pursuit to eradicate and destroy Hamas, it's a game changer. It is a complete game changer. Then what's going to happen? You're going to pull the extremists in Egypt into it, Lebanon into it, right there on the border of Gaza. You're going to pull, now Saudi Arabia have to pull back. They can't normalize relations with Israel like they were planning to. Iran will step up now and increase its support. That region will forever be engulfed in chaos, and America cannot be seen as a warmonger in this. They must be seen as a peacemaker.
America's been a warmonger for decades, and while I don't want to see boots of American soldiers on the ground over there, I most certainly don't want to, which is warmongering, right? What we did in Iraq was a horrible thing. We shouldn't have been in Afghanistan despite all the civil rights atrocities in Afghanistan. Of course, Iraq, we were the ones that armed Saddam Hussein to protect from Iran. But, you know, you began this, you talk about, well, these Israelis spit on this nun, right? Well, you know, what we all saw was a German tattoo artist at a trans festival had her clothes torn off and she was raped and her legs broken while scores of men spit on her as they paraded her corpse around. And that, of course, is all horrifyingly all over Twitter. And what you always want to do is to point the finger elsewhere and talk about it's all sides, but it's not all sides, right? The hardliners in Israel have taken this horrifying blockade that has destroyed opportunity for Palestinians, but it's always in response to normalized relations that then lead to terror. And the real problem is the jihadists, the radical Islamists that, you know, the Palestinians have repeatedly voted into control, right? And
just like we voted in Donald Trump.
Yeah, Donald Trump.
A man who led an insurrection of his own nation. The same way we voted in Donald Trump, a man who led and inspired and motivated an insurrection against his own nation, who would not accept the results of a democratically elected election. Well, then we want to talk about other people's country and who they elect. Look at us.
You know what's crazy?
Look at us.
Is we have grandmothers that just walked into the Capitol on January 6th on FBI watch lists, and we have terrorists in masks and scarves walk around New York holding up swastikas demanding death to Jews that aren't on watch lists, right? You want to talk about everything about what except what's happening now. You want to talk about everything as what's the predicate for the security actions by the Israelis. You want to talk about everything. You want to talk about spitting. I don't even know spitting. We all know that there were scores of men cheering corpses, right? We know that they were going house to
and
house,
that's un-Islamic.
house to house.
And that is un-Islamic.
The Nation of Islam clearly doesn't support that. See, and that's
Why
what
do
you
you say
talked
that?
about.
Explain.
Because the Nation of Islam, you just talked about it. Y'all don't support this violence towards other people, but we have radical Islamist regimes that hundreds of millions of people support, right? That are in a similar but very different religion that do articulate that it's okay to kill infidels, okay to kill Christians, okay to kill Jews. And the thing is,
but you got crazy
I know
Christians.
you don't want to let me talk.
You got crazy
just interrupt me
Christians,
again.
Charles, who believe the same thing. Look, Adolf Hitler claimed to be a Christian. Adolf Hitler was going to church. Adolf Hitler, while he was exterminating Jews in ovens and in gas chambers, was attending church services on Sunday, taking communion. Look, man, you got crazies on both sides. You have Ku Klux Klan members who have Christ-centered white supremacist churches and go on a Sunday and kill innocent worshipers that are black inside of a church and bomb children inside of a church. Look, we got these crazies, man, in the name of religion all over the place. The same way you had some of those in the Christian Crusades who were claiming Christianity and were nothing more than demons. They exist in all religions, man.
And the problem is, it's the number of people that exist. You talk about Adolf Hitler claiming to be a Christian, right? But of course it was the Western world, the great sea of Christianity that rose up to stop him. And the question, where is the Muslim faithful of the Middle East? Again, I'm not at all talking about your religion, which is the Nation of Islam, and many Muslims don't recognize that as a legitimate form of the Muslim faith. And you can pretend it's not the case.
Just like Christians don't recognize Mormons and Baptists recognize Jehovah's Witnesses.
But you want to talk about Adolf Hitler, but what you don't have is you don't have Lebanon, Iran, Saudi Arabia rising up to stop Hamas, right? Whereas in the World War II, of course, you had America, Great Britain, France, Poland, Russia, tons of people that are traditionally historically Christian rise up and say, hey, no, we're not going to allow this to happen.
Not until Hitler invaded their countries.
Okay.
They didn't stand up to fight Adolf Hitler until he invaded their countries first. The only one he had not invaded was America yet. But what about the Pope in Rome? How long did he ignore and even in writings said he would not speak about the Jewish Holocaust while he knew factual evidence, he knew that millions were being put in ovens and being exterminated. The Catholic Church remained silent on purpose because they had no love for Jews.
You betray yourself with your own words, right? You talk about how we shouldn't say down with Israel that much. Those were your words, that much, right? The truth is that no one should be arguing at all for the eradication or genocide of any people for their faith. And the truth is, you have scores of Israeli people that are against the hardliners, have been against the blockades. You have liberals in Israel that own, but it's you want to talk about everything. You want to talk about Adolf Hitler from what was that now, 90 years ago? You want to talk about some incident with some radical,
well, let's talk about 3 weeks ago.
Orthodox intolerant. That's all. But it's
let's talk about 3 weeks ago.
What we're talking about right now. Let's hear what. Interrupt me again.
3
And tell me
weeks ago,
some other story.
There was a 60 Minutes piece that was done with Israeli military men and women who have stood up publicly against their own government and what they're doing in regards to Palestine and these new laws that they're trying to implement. Now you have tens of thousands of Israeli soldiers who are saying that if Israel went to war, that they would not support that war because the hardliners in Israel were taking over the government with extremism. Charles, the extremism is becoming a sickness and a disease in every nation, man. You got some people right here in the United States Congress and Senate who sound just like some serious extremists, who made excuses for January 6th protesters, who made excuses for their behavior.
Hold on, now you've trot out January 6th 3 times in this conversation. Do you see January 6th as being an equivalence of what happened in Israel?
Not at all.
Well, then why do you keep bringing it up?
Because January 6th.
Because you're dishonest.
No,
and I mean, that's
because
it.
January 6th had extremists.
No. Let's talk
extremists
about
who attacked their own
let's
government.
Go back. Let's
they
go
still
back.
they attacked their own government.
Let's go back to Israeli soldiers and Israeli people pushing them back against the hardliners, right? So where are the loud voices in Palestine? Where are the loud voices in Lebanon? Where are the loud voices in Iran? Where are the scores of people saying, no, this is over? Instead, what you're seeing
the PLO.
Instead, what you're seeing is people getting on CNN, being platformed by CNN, that evil, dishonest organization, and saying, oh, these were mostly military combatants. We weren't targeting people, literally going house to house, executing women and children,
Muslim scholars
literally raping
right now,
people.
Since Saturday, that's on Twitter, since Saturday, condemning Hamas.
Okay.
Condemning that activity. And let me say this to you, man. I don't give a damn.
You just make stuff up.
No, let me say
literally
this.
just make stuff up.
Go on Twitter
you're
and look.
The problem.
Go on Twitter and look. There are Muslim scholars all over the world condemning Hamas.
Do you condemn
for their
it? Do you condemn
right,
Hamas?
I do.
Okay.
Absolutely, I do.
Okay.
Because let me tell you something, man. You cannot take children hostage. That is against the law of Islam.
Well, you shouldn't rape and kill them either.
Let me finish with you, man.
Okay.
In Islam, you rape a woman, your head is removed.
Okay.
Give a damn what your religion is. And so if these so-called Muslims grabbed a woman of anywhere in Israel and raped that woman, they deserve to die.
Okay.
Because they are beasts in human form.
I'm glad to
How
hear you say
in the hell could you chant Allah Akbar and rape a woman at the same time? You are a devil hiding in the name of the religion.
So,
but Charles,
glad to hear you
this
say it.
madness is existing more and more and more all over the world. These extremists are gaining popularity in every country now, brother. Look at them in Europe. Look at the Brexit group in Europe. So, extremism taking control of the European political circles. Well, it's real, man.
Well, you know what I missed in the Brexit people, right? I missed them defiling corpses while thousands of people cheered and they drove them around in the back of vehicles. I missed the Brexit people going to a music festival and executing a bunch of people. I missed it. You love to talk about January 6th.
But right in America, we had a man claim Christianity and said he loved the gospel of Christ Jesus, went to a hotel room, got him a good view, and was shooting gays and killing people at a concert.
Actually, that was country and western aficionados. It wasn't gays. You're thinking of the Pulse
assassination. No. Wait a minute. In his little letter that was released by an ex-girlfriend, he said he wanted to kill those who tolerated gays and who would party with gays. Then that same guy in Las Vegas, that was a part of his letter to his girlfriend.
Yeah.
Also, this fool in Florida who had the same damn spirit and mindset, killed all the people in that club like that, extremists. They exist in every faith.
But here's the difference, right? There are evil extremists across this world, but here's the difference. Hamas that did this, right, is the people elected to govern Palestine by the majority of Palestinians. We need to stop pretending that radical Islamism is it. We've heard it. We've seen it in the last week. We've seen people over and over again trying to rationalize or justify, and not just Muslim people. We have liberals all across the United States we have elected officials in the United States trying to victim blame Israelis for the actions of these terrorists. And we need to stop normalizing terror directed at anyone. It's just like those who across this country justified the violent looting of this country in response to horrifying police conduct. And we you talk about January 6th, you don't talk about all the violent actions. And we should be intolerant of violent, intolerant people.
Complete
I don't
blockade,
care
did you agree with that?
what their motivation is. No. In fact, I wrote a very long piece about how I'm against the complete blockade, but I was actually against the earlier blockade. The thing is that when
those are extremists who are putting forth that idea in Israel to do that, and the Israeli government bent to that extremism. That level of extremism produces extreme responses. They produce terrorists like that, man, with that level of extremism. Even a common sense man like yourself, who's against a lot of what's happening over there, admit that blockade will hurt innocent people.
But yes, most certainly did, but your math doesn't math, right? The blockade was instituted in response to terror, not terror in
But it
response
will produce
to it.
more terror.
Well, and that was my issue, right? I agree with you on that point, right? Instead, what they should have done, if there's not going to be a two-state solution, right, which it was always rejected by everyone but the Israelis, right? The Israelis had proposed it over again, and now there's hardly enough of Palestine left to have a two-state solution. And I disagree also with the radical settlers still pushing people out. But the truth is that if they had a two-state solution in 1947, if they had a two-state solution in the 70s, none of this would be occurring. We would just see further attacks on the Jewish people. And at the end of the day, we have to stop pretending that both sides want to see the eradication or genocide of both sides. And, this is every time Israel leans into normalization, you see buses blown up. You see children killed. You see cafes blown up. And here, I think this is a horrifying end. So, well, hold on. I think this is a horrifying end, right? I think what we're going to see is widespread displacement of innocent Palestinian people. So the question is, why did the Hamas do it? Why did Hezbollah support it? The leadership of Hamas are billionaires that live in Lebanon behind gates. And they're using innocent Palestinian people as pawns, both with their lies, right? And their demonizations of Jews. I don't disagree with that. And at some point, we need to start having this tough conversation about how do we fix it.
But do you
and
remember
the truth is, you have to be intolerant of religious, violent intolerance.
Anwar Sadat was a Muslim leader of a Muslim-recognized nation, and he wanted to normalize relations with Israel. This is in the late 70s, 80s he started doing this. He started in the late 70s trying to produce this relationship.
Right.
And what did they do to him? His own military extremists set him up and killed him on a stage, murdered him. Charles, listen to me, man. I'm going to be honest with you. What did Abbas do of the PLO leadership after Arafat? Abbas agreed to it, this two-state solution. Abbas agreed to it. He was a victim within 2 weeks of 9 assassination attempts.
Well, that's because...
So I'm telling you, Charles, this extremism exists on both sides. Okay. What happened when Netanyahu first suggested that he was willing to make these concessions? Remember that? He said when Clinton was in office that he was willing to make these concessions to produce this two-state solution. His own government went crazy on him and kicked him out of office. Okay. Now he's back. And he's bowing down to the extremism now. But Charles, this exists on both sides.
But it doesn't exist to the degree on both sides, and that's the grand lie. Like you keep talking about Christianity as if there's so much radical, violent Christianity that exists in this world, and it does not, right? The radical violence, and you look at it, like Iran, if you look at photos of Iran before the Ayatollah and the extremists took over, Iran is the foundational space of mathematics in this world. The culture of Iran, the Ayatollah went in there and destroyed all the positive history and subjugated the women and murdered the people, the moderates, and now we have extremism. We have to all start fighting against extremism.
But what good things did he do? When he took over,
the Ayatollah did good things?
Let me tell you what he did.
Oh,
he ridded the entire country of alcohol. Not a drop of alcohol could be sold or imported into Iran.
Oh, you mean... Let me finish. He didn't let people be free?
He disallowed the banks or any lending institutions to charge interest to anyone who borrowed money from banks or lending institutions. There could be no interest. Tell you what else he did. He also outlawed prostitution.
You are defending
and he got rid of all the prostitution clubs.
Sharia
Let's talk about what he did.
He get to the end of
he
this
made mistakes,
to see the whole damn problem.
He made mistakes, but he did
normalizing evil Sharia theocracy.
Mistakes, but he did some good.
He was an evil bastard.
And he gave everybody free health care.
He was an evil bastard.
They all had free health care to this day.
We got to the ending point so you could exemplify the problem is people trying to rationalize extremist Sharia nonsense.
We need peace.
And I only said nonsense because I'm not going to curse on this fine show.
We need peace in the Middle East.